What if I told you that the United States government secretly brought over 1,600 Nazi scientists to America after World War II? Men who had used concentration camp slaves in their research, who had developed weapons that killed thousands, who had been active Nazi Party members? That the U.S. military deliberately falsified these scientists' records, erased evidence of their war crimes, and gave them new identities so they could work on America's most sensitive military and space programs? That Werner von Braun, the charismatic face of NASA who put Americans on the moon, had personally selected concentration camp prisoners to work in his underground rocket factory, where they died by the thousands from starvation, beatings, and hangings? This is the story of Operation Paperclip, the program that proved America was willing to embrace Nazis if they offered technological advantage over the Soviet Union. And the darkest part, it worked. The Nazi scientists' contributions accelerated American military and space technology by decades, which means the moon landing itself has Nazi fingerprints all over it. April to May 1945. Nazi Germany collapses. As Allied forces advanced into Germany from both east and west, they discovered something unexpected. German technology was far more advanced than intelligence had predicted. The V-2 rocket, a ballistic missile that had rained terror on London and Antwerp, represented a quantum leap in rocket technology. Nothing the Allies possessed came close. German jet aircraft like the Me-262 were faster and more advanced than any Allied fighter. German submarine designs incorporated revolutionary features that made them nearly undetectable. German scientists had conducted research on everything from ballistic missiles to nerve agents to infrared optics to supersonic wind tunnels, research that was years ahead of similar Allied programs. American and British intelligence realized immediately that whoever captured these scientists and their research would have an enormous post-war advantage. And there was another consideration. The Soviet Union was also advancing through Germany from the east, capturing scientists and technology wherever they could. The Grand Alliance, America, Britain, and the Soviet Union, had barely held together during the war. Now, with Germany defeated, the alliance was fracturing. The Cold War was beginning before the Hot War had even officially ended. President Truman and his military advisors faced a calculation. Option 1. Follow the stated policy of denazification. Prosecute Nazi scientists, prevent them from continuing their research, ensure they faced justice for any war crimes. Option 2. Recruit Nazi scientists before the Soviets could, bring them to America, use their expertise to accelerate American military development. The two options were incompatible. If you were going to recruit scientists, you couldn't simultaneously prosecute them for war crimes. You had to choose. In September 1945, President Truman authorized Operation Overcast, later renamed Operation Paperclip, a program to bring German scientists to the United States. The original parameters were clear. Only scientists who had not been Nazi Party members and who had not participated in war crimes could be recruited. These parameters would be systematically violated from the program's first days. The architects of Operation Paperclip developed a justification that would be repeated throughout the program. These scientists are tools. They developed technology for whoever employed them. They happened to work for Nazi Germany, but that was an accident of geography and timing. Their knowledge is ideologically neutral. We can use their expertise without endorsing their past. This justification was, at best, morally questionable. At worst, it was deliberate self-deception. But it was embraced by key figures in the U.S. military and intelligence communities. Major General Hugh Kenner, deputy commander of the U.S. Strategic Air Forces in Europe, argued, "The propaganda value to America of accomplishing large-scale rocket development before Russia cannot be overestimated. To ensure this development, we must offer these German scientists the opportunity to continue their professional work and to live under conditions comparable to those they enjoyed in Germany." Note the assumption. These scientists had enjoyed conditions in Nazi Germany. They weren't victims. They were professionals who should be made comfortable. Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, JIOA, was created specifically to manage the recruitment of German scientists. The JIOA developed a two-track approach. Track 1. Publicly continue supporting denazification and war crimes prosecutions. Track 2. Secretly identify valuable scientists regardless of their Nazi affiliations, whitewash their records, and bring them to America. The whitewashing was systematic. The JIOA would remove Nazi Party membership records from scientists' files, eliminate or minimize documentation of war crimes, create new biographical summaries emphasizing scientific credentials and minimizing political activities, reclassify war crimes as scientific research conducted under orders, omit inconvenient facts about concentration camp slave labor. This wasn't an occasional oversight, it was policy. The most famous and controversial recruit of Operation Paperclip was Wernher von Braun. Von Braun was the technical genius behind the V-2 rocket program. He was brilliant, charismatic, and a Nazi. Von Braun's background: joined the Nazi Party in 1937, joined the SS Schutzstaffel in 1940, eventually reaching the rank of Sturmbannführer, Major, served as technical director of the V-2 program at Peenemünde Research Facility, personally visited concentration camps to select slave laborers for rocket production. The V-2 program killed more people in its production than in its deployment. Approximately 9,000 people were killed by V-2 strikes on London, Antwerp, and other cities. Approximately 20,000 concentration camp prisoners died. Producing V-2s at the Mittelbau-Dora underground factory. The Mittelbau-Dora facility was a subterranean nightmare. Concentration camp prisoners, primarily from Buchenwald, were forced to excavate tunnels in the Harz Mountains and build rockets in the underground factory. Conditions were deliberately lethal. Prisoners worked 18-hour shifts in freezing, poorly ventilated tunnels. No sanitation facilities. Prisoners worked surrounded by their own waste. Minimal food. Starvation rations designed to work prisoners to death. Brutal beatings and hangings for any perceived infractions or insufficient productivity. Sleeping in the tunnels themselves in the early months, surrounded by industrial equipment and toxic fumes, survivors testified that von Braun visited the facility multiple times, inspecting production and personally selecting prisoners for specific tasks requiring technical skill. One survivor, Adam Kabala, testified, "I saw von Braun in the tunnels. He came to inspect the work. When he saw a prisoner who looked intelligent, he would ask questions through a translator. If the prisoner couldn't answer fast enough or seemed weak, guards would beat him. Sometimes they'd hang him right there, from the crane hooks as an example." Von Braun later claimed he had no authority over the treatment of prisoners, that he was simply a scientist focused on rockets, that he was following orders. This defense was demonstrably false. As technical director of the program, von Braun had enormous influence. He requested slave labor. He specified the skills needed. He inspected facilities where prisoners were dying. But after the war, when American intelligence officers found von Braun and his team, none of this mattered. Von Braun had knowledge of advanced rocketry that the United States wanted desperately, especially since the Soviets were also hunting for German rocket scientists. When von Braun was brought to the United States in 1945, his official record was sanitized. What was removed? His SS membership initially. Detailed accounts of his visits to Mittelbau-Dora. Testimony from concentration camp survivors about his personal involvement. Documentation of his Nazi Party membership and activities, what was emphasized, his scientific credentials and accomplishments, his cooperation with American forces after Germany's surrender, his youth during the Nazi period, he was 33 when the war ended, hardly an innocent. His claim that he'd only joined the Nazi Party and SS to continue his rocket research, von Braun gave interviews portraying himself as an apolitical scientist who had been forced to work for the Nazis, but had always dreamed of space exploration, not weapons. This narrative was deliberately constructed and promoted by the U.S. government, which needed von Braun to be palatable to the American public. When concerns were raised by State Department officials, by military officers uncomfortable with the program, by intelligence analysts who had read von Braun's actual records, they were overruled by higher authorities who prioritized technological advancement over moral considerations. A 1947 memo from the JIOA director stated explicitly, "The immigration of these scientists is of utmost importance to our national security. Security considerations require that their wartime activities be classified. Public disclosure would compromise the program and provide propaganda advantage to the Soviets." Translation: We're bringing in Nazis, we know we're bringing in Nazis, and we're going to lie about it because admitting the truth would be embarrassing. Von Braun was the most famous paperclip recruit, but he was far from alone. Over 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians were brought to the United States under Operation Paperclip. Many had Nazi pasts that were deliberately obscured. Arthur Rudolph was operations director of the Mittelbau-Dora facility, the underground factory where 20,000 concentration camp prisoners died, producing V-2 rockets. Survivors testified that Rudolph personally ordered beatings and hangings of prisoners who didn't meet production quotas. One survivor stated that Rudolph once ordered 12 prisoners hanged simultaneously from overhead crane hooks as punishment for sabotage. After the war, Rudolph was brought to the United States and his record was whitewashed. He worked on the Saturn V rocket program that put Americans on the moon. He received the NASA Distinguished Service Medal. In 1984, when Justice Department investigators finally examined his wartime record, Rudolph fled the United States rather than face denaturalization and possible war crimes prosecution. He died in Germany in 1996, having never faced trial. Hubertus Strughold, known as the father of space medicine, Strughold conducted experiments on human subjects, including concentration camp prisoners, testing the effects of extreme altitude, temperature, and pressure. These experiments often killed or permanently injured subjects. They were conducted without consent and constituted clear medical war crimes. After the war, Strughold's records were sanitized. He was brought to the United States and became a pioneer in aerospace medicine, helping develop systems that protected American astronauts. He was honored with numerous awards and had the NASA Strughold Award named after him, until 2013, when the award was quietly renamed after revelations about his wartime activities. Kurt Blohm. Blohm was a high-ranking Nazi scientist who conducted biological warfare research, including experiments on concentration camp prisoners using plague bacteria. He was tried at Nuremberg for war crimes, but acquitted due to insufficient evidence, much of which had been destroyed or classified by U.S. authorities who wanted to recruit him. After his acquittal, Blohm was secretly brought to the United States and worked on biological warfare research for the U.S. military. The pattern. These weren't isolated cases. They were representative of a systematic program that 1. Identified German scientists with valuable knowledge. 2. Deliberately obscured or erased their Nazi affiliations and war crimes. 3. Brought them to the United States under false pretenses. 4. Employed them in sensitive military and scientific programs. 5. Prevented investigation or prosecution of their wartime activities. Defenders of Operation Paperclip made, and continue to make, several arguments. Argument 1. The Soviets were doing the same thing. This is true. The Soviet Union captured German scientists and technology aggressively. If the United States hadn't recruited these scientists, the Soviets would have. But the other side is doing it too has never been a compelling moral justification. It's an argument for strategic necessity, not ethical legitimacy. Argument 2. The knowledge was too valuable to waste. The technology developed by Nazi scientists, rockets, jet aircraft, advanced weapons systems, did accelerate American military and space capabilities. The moon landing was accomplished using rockets designed by von Braun and other paperclip scientists. American Cold War military advantages were partly built on Nazi technology. But this raises an uncomfortable question. Is any technological advancement worth embracing war criminals? Does the end of winning the space race justify the means of employing men who used slave labor and conducted lethal human experiments? Argument 3. They were following orders. This was the defense used at Nuremberg, and it was explicitly rejected. The tribunal established that following orders is not a defense for war crimes. Individuals have moral responsibility regardless of orders. Yet this exact defense was used to justify recruiting Nazi scientists. They claimed they were just following orders, and American authorities accepted this explanation, not because they believed it, but because it was convenient. Argument 4. They weren't real Nazis. They were scientists who happened to work in Nazi Germany. This argument requires willful blindness. Many paperclip scientists were Nazi party members. Several were SS officers. They designed weapons specifically to kill Allied soldiers and civilians. They used concentration camp slave labor. They conducted experiments on human subjects without consent. These weren't apolitical scientists caught in unfortunate circumstances. They were active participants in the Nazi regime who benefited from and contributed to its atrocities. Operation Paperclip had costs beyond the obvious moral compromises. Legal cost. The program violated stated U.S. policy on denazification and war crimes prosecution. Officials lied to Congress, falsified records, and circumvented legal restrictions. This established precedents that would be repeated in later intelligence operations. The willingness to lie, to violate legal restrictions, to prioritize expediency over legality. Diplomatic cost. When details of Operation Paperclip emerged, initially in limited form, then more completely in the 1970s and beyond, America's moral authority was damaged. How could the United States claim to stand for justice and human rights when it had employed Nazi war criminals? Historical cost. The program meant that many Nazi scientists never faced justice for their crimes. Victims and survivors saw their tormentors honored and celebrated rather than prosecuted. The concentration camp prisoners who died building V-2 rockets received no justice. Their killers received NASA awards instead. Moral cost. Perhaps most significantly, Operation Paperclip established that America's stated values, justice, human rights, accountability, were negotiable when strategic interests were at stake. This wasn't a rogue operation. It was official policy, approved at the highest levels, sustained for decades. It taught the lesson that America would compromise its principles for strategic advantage. That lesson would be applied repeatedly throughout the Cold War, in coups, assassinations, and support for dictatorships, with Operation Paperclip serving as the template. Operation Paperclip remained partially classified until the 1970s. When investigative journalists and historians began uncovering the program's full scope, public reaction was mixed. Some Americans were outraged. How could the government have employed Nazis? How could men who used slave labor be honored as heroes? How could war criminals be given awards and comfortable lives in America? Others were pragmatic. The Cold War was an existential struggle. The Soviets had nuclear weapons and were aggressively expanding their influence. America needed every advantage. If that meant employing former Nazis, so be it. Still, others were in denial. Surely the government wouldn't have knowingly employed war criminals. There must have been misunderstandings, false accusations by enemies, exaggerations by critics. The full documentary record, declassified through Freedom of Information Act, requests over decades, proved the critics right. Operation Paperclip was exactly what it appeared to be: a systematic program to recruit Nazi scientists, whitewash their records, and employ them in American military and space programs while preventing investigation or prosecution of their war crimes. In 1984, the U.S. Justice Department's Office of Special Investigations began examining paperclip scientists' wartime activities. Several scientists, including Arthur Rudolph, fled the country rather than face investigation. Others died before they could be prosecuted. A few faced denaturalization proceedings, losing their American citizenship. But none were ever tried for war crimes. The statute of limitations had expired, evidence had been destroyed or classified, witnesses had died, and prosecuting elderly men decades after their crimes was legally and politically complicated. Justice, such as it was, came only in the form of historical acknowledgement, the truth finally being told, decades too late to matter to the victims. Today, Wernher von Braun is remembered primarily as the architect of the Apollo program. There's a crater on the moon named after him. NASA facilities bear his name. Biographies celebrate his genius and vision. The 20,000 concentration camp prisoners who died building his rockets are footnotes, if they're mentioned at all. This is the legacy of Operation Paperclip. Technological triumph built on moral compromise. The United States reached the moon partly because it was willing to employ men who had used slave labor, conducted lethal experiments, and participated in Nazi atrocities. That success came at a cost, not to America, which benefited enormously, but to the victims who never saw justice, and to the principle that war crimes should be prosecuted regardless of the perpetrator's usefulness. Operation Paperclip forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. Is any technological advancement worth embracing war criminals? Should strategic advantage outweigh moral principles? Can brilliant scientists be separated from their horrific crimes? The American government answered these questions clearly. Yes, strategic advantage matters more than justice. Yes, we'll compromise our principles for technological edge. Yes, we'll honor men who committed atrocities if they're useful to us. These answers won the Cold War. They put Americans on the moon. They advanced military technology by decades. But they also established that America's commitment to justice and human rights was conditional, applicable when convenient, negotiable when inconvenient. Every time you see footage of the Apollo 11 moon landing, remember this. The rocket that carried Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin was designed by Wernher von Braun, a former SS officer who used concentration camp slave labor. The technology that put Americans on the moon was developed using knowledge extracted from Nazi rocket programs that killed tens of thousands of people. The greatest achievement in space exploration history has Nazi fingerprints all over it. That doesn't diminish the courage of the astronauts or the brilliance of the achievement, but it does complicate the story in ways we rarely acknowledge. Because the truth is that Operation Paperclip worked, the Nazi scientists' contributions were real and significant, America gained enormous strategic advantages. The moral compromise was worth it, at least that's what the architects of the program believed. Whether history will agree remains to be seen. If this story disturbed you, if it made you think about moral compromises in pursuit of strategic goals, about the price of technological progress, about justice delayed and denied, hit that subscribe button. Operation Paperclip is one of the most successful and morally troubling programs in American history. It deserves to be remembered not as a triumph, but as a warning. The moon is beautiful, but the path we took to get there is stained with blood.